everybody. Can you hear me? Barely. Oh, that's better. Hi, I'm Paul Fain. Glad you're here. I'm excited about our expert panelists in this discussion. I'm just going to give a very brief lay of the land and a very brief introduction of the two of them, and then we'll get right into a moderated discussion. Once again, my name's Paul Fain. I'm a journalist, longtime higher ed reporter, now focused on connections between education and work, which is a busy beat these days. Just a couple numbers that have been keeping me busy. As you all know, we're in a serious college enrollment crisis. Community college enrollments are down 15% nationally over 2 years. That's the biggest decline in a half century. We're also facing an unprecedented labor market, the great resignation, the great renegotiation, whatever you want to call it. 11 million open jobs, flat labor market participation rates that haven't recovered since before the pandemic. 2/3 of folks who are unemployed want to change fields. And you can see quite a bit of overlap, particularly with the community college student in that labor market swirl. 25 to 29-year-olds had 2 times the decline in college enrollment over the last year. It was a 10% decline, and that's including 4-year institutions. So what's driving it? You've all probably seen some data on this, but one that I think we really can't underestimate is uncertainty and anxiety about the value of college, the value of a credential, what you're going to get when you get into the labor market. Will the degree pay off? More importantly, is the job stable? You think about the hospitality field and folks' unwillingness to re-enter that. A couple other issues. Obviously, the pandemic exposed the crisis in time. We spent a lot of our energy on finances, which remain a barrier to college completion and access. But time, I think we all got to see how serious that is. And I think it's interesting to see which institutions are bucking the norm. Blue Ridge Community College in North Carolina, as well as some other ones, have reconnected with adult students who had a substantial number of college credits but had left the system. And for Blue Ridge, that resulted in a 9% enrollment increase and a 40% increase in their older student market. So I, for a very long time, have written about competency-based education. It's kind of like my MOOC in that I've been thinking that its moment is going to come, and I keep writing about it, and it really never has at scale besides Western Governors University. They are definitely a major exception to that statement. But on the whole, I wrote a lot about Southern New Hampshire's College for America. Didn't have the growth that I think some of us thought it might in the 2-year space. Don't count them out again. But we're here to talk about is there more potential in this moment, given some of the indicators I mentioned? Skills-based hiring is having a moment. If you didn't know it, I'm giving you a little tip here. The president is likely to cite skills-based hiring in the State of the Union today. If you look at the White House fact sheet, they give that a big plug. So really different time, I think, for this discussion than it was 2 years ago. So without further ado, our panelists, Natasha Jankowski, 2 down from me, the former executive director of the National Institute for Learning Outcome Assessment for 10 years-ish. She's a higher education and assessment consultant, currently a senior fellow focused on community colleges with the Strata Education Network, among many other experiences. Eric Heiser, Provost of Academic and Student Affairs at Central Ohio Technical College, and we wrote about Eric's institution recently with Intel's announcement of a $20 billion semiconductor facility with $100 million in training dollars. That didn't get as much attention. It's a lot of money for training pathways in the state. Eric's an Aspen Fellow, and I came across his work, his previous role at Salt Lake Community College, where you were for about 6 years as a dean, and you worked on some CBE projects there. So I'm going to start off with Natasha. Just given your work on assessment and your perspective from Strata, what do you see the potential right now for growth, specific in the 2-year college space for CBE?
Well, I think I'm going to go with you, Paul, on that I'm a big advocate for CBE, and I keep waiting for like the shoe to drop and the S curve of innovation and uptake to really launch in that space. So from I'm going to do this in two different sort of hats. One on the assessment hat, and then one thinking about the conversations we've been having through Strata with community college leaders on their current needs. And when we think about the crunch that people have for time, the employer workforce shortages that need a quick pivot turnaround, pardon my P's, I will watch that on this mic, and then also the enrollment declines that are being faced by our community colleges. Competency-based education, especially approaching how do we get people in, reskill, upskill, move them around by focusing in on competencies, seems like a no-brainer. Seems like a great way to build the solution in, to be able to understand what are you bringing, how does this translate into a different way. We do that a lot in different parts of community college work, whether it's prior learning in some spaces in our continuing ed unit. So there's a knowledge and skill base there to build from, maybe not sort of competency-based programs at large per se, but the potential for engaging in competency-based education as a means to address the wide-scale sort of collection of needs that we have, and also help with time and cost, I don't think can be understated. So I am optimistic, and it also opens up the ways in which we can go about assessing in terms of demonstrating what I know and can do, and to which audiences in ways that have value and count in the moment in time that we need it. So if I don't have employer trust right now, what's a great way to get it? Show you what I can do, and what are the things that you can see that I can do, and how do I know that, and how do you know that? And so I think you put those two together, and we're in a really, I hope, positive space. I think there's some challenges to it we can talk about, but that's later. Right now I'm going to keep you optimistic in the we can do this, we shall overcome part of this, but I think it is a opportune moment for competency-based to move forward in this space in response to our current needs.
And given that I didn't really give you much of an introduction, could you just briefly talk about your current work in the two-year space?
Sure. So for those of you who may not know, Strata Education Network is a nonprofit social impact organization dedicated to helping people leverage education and training after high school in order to secure a good job, do meaningful work, and contribute to their economies and lead a fulfilling life. So, all the things that we really hope that you get from education, that it's valuable and worth your time, and it's feeding back in meaningful ways to the community. So we're really interested in how can we get education and career in a tighter way. And we are doing that at Strata through grants and investments, Strata Collaborative, which provides direct services, so supports to students, and research. So there was a lot of good shout outs to the public viewpoint data. Thank you for all of those that do that. Keep an eye on it. There's more good research coming out from there. But in the community college space within Strata, as we're trying to figure out what we want to do with that, it's been a lot of listening to the field and having conversations with, and trying to understand how do we not get in the way, but how do we provide support and run alongside to make what you're trying to do better and get there faster, and in ways with the data and the resources you need to do it. So we've been going through sort of a year exploration of kinds, and there's a series of blogs that you can read about sort of what our thinking is on it, that are available if you're interested in catching up on that. But it's really trying to figure out how can we best provide support at this time to community colleges as they're trying to address enrollment declines and employer partnership needs and all of that space. So
thank you for that.
Yeah.
So Eric, there's some evidence that targeted subsidies for high demand fields in the two-year space can buck the enrollment crisis. Virginia, Ohio, doing some of that short-term credentialing. I know you go way back on CBE. I wonder what you think, the opportunities and the challenges it faces in this current moment.
Sure. So I guess I'm the eternal optimist when it comes to CBE, having been doing it now for about the past 10 years. I do, and when Paul and I were talking, I talked about, it is going to be CBE's moment. It's sad that it took a pandemic to get us there, but
you could say that about a lot of things.
Right. That's a very positive, really one of the positives that we can take, and that is this idea that our students now are, and Paul kind of alluded to this when we talk about the Great Resignation, they're reevaluating everything about their lives, just like many of us are, right? What the last 2 years have done has really caused folks, I think in a good way, to reevaluate what's going on and what they what they want to do. And simply, those of us in the community college sector simply thinking that we're somehow going back to the way that things were 2 years ago, and that we will dictate how and when you will take a class, and think that students are going to engage with us in the same way, I think that's a fallacy. And I think the students have demonstrated, even during the last year or so, with regard to the downswings that the entire sector has seen, that unless you're serving them in a way that works for them, they'll go elsewhere. And they're really not afraid to do that. The last 2 years have taught them to do things that they never thought they would do. And so I think that's where competency-based can really step in and say, hey, it doesn't have to be about the 16-week term anymore. It can be about when you master the material within that course, you move forward without regard to time and space. And really, it's so simple when we really kind of boil it down. But at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about mastery and removing, we use this line in CBE all the time, removing time as the constant and making learning constant and time the variable. And I think that the colleges that choose to embrace this are going to be the ones that students are going to head to, and those that don't, not that CBE is the end-all be-all, but I think this is definitely now, if it hasn't already, becoming a tool in the tool chest that is going to be kind of your Swiss Army knife that can serve many different populations. And we're not just talking about populations that are already engaging with you. CBE presents opportunities for underserved populations, those that are working multiple jobs. The flexibility that it provides is it very appealing to them. So I do think it's CBE's moment. We'll see, what that adoption rate looks like, but I think the relics of the past are in a good way. They're gonna fall away.
So I want to stick with you for a minute and then give Natasha a chance to weigh in on this too. We talked before the session here about how fast change moved for your institution and your sector. And, I think I'm generalizing grossly even, but I'm a journalist, so that's what I do. But, in the 2-year space, I think there was a lot of additional worry about students adjusting to online, certain programs not being well suited, et cetera. I wonder, and I know that's not entirely fair, the extent to which at the institution level or the state level, there's more of a willingness to experiment with modalities, including competency-based education.
Yeah, a great question. And I think, again, if we had this conversation in 2019, we're having a completely different conversation. But what the last 2 years taught both faculty and students is that, to use an old phrase, we can walk and chew gum, right? We can do both, and we can do it very, very well. So, yeah, we got thrown into it. I was relating to Paul, the phrase that I use is, we did in 2 weeks what likely would have taken 20 years to accomplish, just because we were comfortable, right? We were as a space, and community colleges we like to think of ourselves as more nimble, and I think in many cases that's true. But if we're really honest with ourselves, especially from a student services standpoint, we were forced into some very, very uncomfortable positions. And so I think the comfort level with knowing that it doesn't have to be what we would call the sage on the stage, that it can be the guide on the side, and that students can learn at times and places that work for them, as opposed to Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 8:30 to 9:20. And that comfort level has increased exponentially in the past couple of years because, frankly, we were forced into it. So I would tell you what we're seeing, Paul, from just, it's not really anecdotal because we're now starting to see some trending, but first and foremost, the appetite for a complete on-campus schedule is not there. The students are showing by way of their feet. They want hybrid experiences. They still do want to engage with us on campus. And frankly, we're a very, very big healthcare campus, so they have to be with us. The practical demonstrations, the clinicals, things of that nature. That still has to happen and did happen during the pandemic. But now that students have seen that there are, and faculty, that there are many different ways by which to deliver learning and receive that information, as opposed to the traditional Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule, they're not going back. They're just flat out saying, I need more flex in my life. I've got to be able to balance the job that I'm doing, or jobs in many cases. As an aside, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I think the one thing we're not talking about here that we should be is the underemployed, right? So there's many, many jobs out there right now, but are they jobs that students and or just regular folks who are not students are interested in going into? There's still a lot of underemployment. So the unemployment rate is low, but that underemployment rate is a pretty big deal. So I think that, again, as we look at adults coming back to upskill with us, competency-based provides another way for us to say, we value that experience that you had, we're not discounting it, and we're going to let you move through at a pace that works for you, as opposed to the pace that we dictate.
Natasha, you want to weigh in on that? Obviously you're looking at institutions across the country right now as they kind of look at post-pandemic modalities.
Yeah. So I think there is that definite appetite for a variety of the modalities and interest in that, and in ways too that are beyond just sort of the online or a hybrid or an in-class experience, but also saying who can assess and who do we accept as a verification of that assessment of student learning. So when I think about the employer space, one of the things that's really interesting is, can I take a video of your student that's at your community college doing a competency on the floor, shop floor, and send it to you and say, here's where I verified that they've done that, and now they don't have to come and sit through something else, and you verified it in this way, like that counts. And so what are the ways too that we're opening up that modality of relationships that we have, of whose purview in education certain different elements are? And I think there's more comfort in that because, as Eric mentioned, it's about flexibility and student choice. So as a student, I can say there are certain things that I want to do in person. I want to I need them, I need to ask, I want to tactily get this. And there's other times where maybe I want a virtual internship option, or I want to do a lab that's more adaptive and online to test this out, to see if I even want to go into that environment and engage in that way. And so I can choose at which points in time how I can be engaged based on all the other things that are going in my life. And I think it's a good flip that happened in the pandemic, which was we sort of assumed that when you're a student, that's your main number one priority. And in higher ed, and being a higher ed person forever, we're like, you came to be a student, so we'll give you all these things to do, and you will get to education over and beyond all the other things that are going in your life. And in the pandemic, institutions were like, oh man, students are people, like whole persons. Like, that's crazy. They have all these needs, like they have basic supports, like they couldn't get to campus, like, we had data on our students, but as higher ed as a whole, we didn't know who our students were. We didn't know how best to serve them and what their needs were. And I think community colleges had a better handle on that than other institutions, but that awareness nationally of, like, we need to fully understand what we can do to enable our students to even show up to learn, to be ready to learn, and then have that learning stick in meaningful ways has been crucial. And taking it into competencies is a great way to then say, like, what you did there, that validates. I see you. And that counts, and that has value in our setting and context here. And so I think in that modality question, I just kind of want to open it up to think differently about the ways in which we've shifted our lens as higher education, about where we see these things and what we see as our problems and potential solutions.
I would just follow up on that
Please.
too, Natasha, to say, for those of you that are in here, they're in the community college or higher ed space, Natasha's point about truly knowing who your students are, I would challenge you to ensure that you do know who your students are. I think we are all guilty of just assuming or remembering, right, the what I like to call the urban lore of, oh yeah, these are the students that we serve. But until you actually dig into that data to find out who those students are, you're not going to be doing yourself much of a service. So again, the student population has shifted completely in the last couple of years. So dig into that data. Don't be afraid of it, because that's going to identify to you, A, who you have, and B, most importantly, who you're missing. And especially for community colleges, we have to be asking ourselves both sides of that coin. We have to know who our students are so that we can serve them, but we also have to know who's not there so that we can go engage them, because for some reason they have not engaged with us. And more than likely, we've got something for them. And whether it's communication, whether it's, they don't think they're college material, whatever that might be, unless you dig into that data to see truly who your students are, and I'll give a plug to one of my colleagues, a president down in Texas at Amarillo College, Russell Lowry Hart, a friend of mine and a mentor I consider as well. And his college really kind of shifted the way that they thought about how they serve their students. And I won't say stole, we borrowed from them a pictorial that we update every single semester of who our student is. And it reminds everyone, not just faculty, not just staff, not just administrators, every time you log in on our site, our staff site, you see that picture. And it's called, again, we took it straight from Amarillo, it's called The Culture of Caring. So this is who your student is. At Amarillo, they named that pictorial. They serve majority female population. So they had a name for that student. And I just think calling that out and ensuring that you really do know who that student is, those students that you're serving, gets you to a place that, again, you know how to serve them, but then also tells you who you might be missing.
So let's take a step away from being positive to clearly assessing the challenges here. I get the sense that in any CBE program creation, including especially perhaps direct assessment where you're completely untethered from the credit hour standard, that this is a heavy, heavy lift. Financial aid, academic structure, you name it. It's expensive, and also marketing is tough here. I always think about Capella's FlexPath ads that do such a good job of describing CBE in like no time. And as a journalist who writes like 1,500 words on anything, I'm like, man, that's impressive. But you think about institutions that have resources that most community colleges don't, would have a natural advantage in some of this. Natasha, assessing where two-year institutions are and what the barriers they'll face.
Sure. So if you're interested in this work, I just want to reinforce a resource that Eric had mentioned. He said CBEN, and if you're not familiar, that's the Competency-based Education Network. Amber Garrison Duncan is here from CBEN. They got great resources. It's a good community of people that are implementing this work. So if you want the details on, tell me how we get through this financial aid scheme of how to make this work, that is a community that can help you with that. I will not help you with that right now. I will just make you sad for a moment. But I did want to point you to a resource that can lift you back up after I take us down. So one of the things I think that's really important to understand about community colleges is they sit at a nexus point in a larger ecosystem. And within competency-based education, we have ecosystem issues. For this to work in a community college, I need a 4-year institution that's interested. Generally don't have that happening. I need employers that can ingest this information in meaningful ways. Also, generally don't quite have that. Sometimes I need a credit and non-credit group that can communicate effectively well and share data between each other. Sometimes they're siloed and we can't make that move. And while I've done a lot of mapping and I've done a lot of alignment and design work, that mapping needs to actually go down to meaningful levels of assessment data, which sometimes maybe we have, and maybe that alignment is real, and sometimes it's on paper. And it's more aspirational than legitimate. And again, Paul had mentioned like Western Governors University crushing it in this area, so we're going to keep them over on the side as a beacon of light and hope. But for the majority of community colleges, if I have a competency-based education program and I know I have a student population that steps in and out, it is so beneficial because my students step in and out, and I can give them where they are at the time they need it in the way that they need it. I can say, you have all of the knowledge and skills except for this one competency to get what would be this credit, let's say. But if they're going to go somewhere else, we have an issue of how does that get ingested elsewhere. We have an issue of how do we put that on something that's understandable? How do we communicate effectively to our community to understand? And when our students are coming in with differing ideas about education in this space, the principles behind what competency-based education is, clear and transparent competencies, before you move forward, having assessment that you can actually do these things. Those are key design elements of any good educational experience. Any good educational experience should have those things. And I think we can do that across the board, but to fully shift and move into a larger, like, okay, this is a competency-based education program. You're moving through this. This is a degree in that space. Because we have these ecosystem issues where community colleges sit, it makes it very difficult to try to push as the leverage point of scale from the community college out, if that makes sense.
100%.
I would say too, partly because I would get shot at after leaving this stage as the chair of the board for CBEN, that
I'll provide cover.
we were, so when I was in Salt Lake, we were a founding member of CBEN when it started. It was the Lumina Foundation project, and really the reason behind it was Lumina had looked at it and said, hey, we see this CBE thing is coming up, and we are very excited. However, we're also kind of afraid at what the quality implications are. We need to make sure that we have quality standards behind this so that bad actors are not invited into this space and give CBE a bad name. So I would tell you two things to Paul's question. One, yes, this work is incredibly hard. I'm in the middle of it right now at my second institution. It's a lot of work. You've got to have faculty that are ready to step up and be champions for that work and know that it does take a lot to get there. But the most important part is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So the resources that we've built for almost the last 10 years with CBEN are there for that community. And that community has grown now to well over 100 institutions that are actively doing some sort of CBE, whether it's a full-fledged program, whether it's a certificate, what have you. And that's everyone that I talk to within the CBE sphere or that wants to be in that sphere is I don't even know how to get started. CBEN, that's the answer. The work has been done from that level in terms of how do I, to Natasha's point, how do I manage financial aid? How do I stand this thing up? All of those things, all of that work's been done. So it's not like you're jumping into a pool with a blindfold on and unsure of where you're going to come up. Those resources are out there, but you do need to know this is a departure from the way that we normally do higher ed. And because of that, some systems exist and others don't. You have to be comfortable with that. So there's some manual processes involved. And you also have to be comfortable with the work that comes with it. But I will guarantee you, when faculty see the advantages within a CBE program and what it allows them to do, they tend to be your best cheerleaders from within that institution. So know that there's work, right? And nothing good is ever easy, right? But there's plenty of resource and support, and that the network behind CBEN has, like I said, almost a decade behind it, and we are a group that is very interested in not only moving forward with the cause, but supporting those who are coming alongside.
Yeah, go for it, Natasha.
And I just want to add that you can find a lot of way in, right? Like we're having all these conversations here about micro-credentials. That's a great way in to a competency-based conversation, bundle some competencies together, put it in a credential, deal with that. And I want to, where are the community colleges? We got community colleges in here, folks? Hi, friends. Right. So this is for both. This is just a higher ed statement, but this is for my community college folks. So I was going around doing all these conversations with these presidents and community colleges, and we were talking about all the different issues that they're running into. And one of the things I think that was very fascinating that plays into this conversation here is there was a president, my favorite quote was, they were like, we need to stop bending the knee to the 4 years. They were like, we know what our students need. We know how best to do them. They come over here in the summer anyway and take our chemistry class and then transfer it back over. We're doing all this stuff, and yet we just keep going to like the 4 years change something, and we got to pivot and change instead of being the ones that are leading this charge. And I think that's really, there's a lot in there that's to enjoy in a conversation space. But when I think about unbundling things to get to competency levels to do some of this work in a space where our other university providers are not in alignment to engage and do that thing, part of it is an issue that we run into between our higher ed systems of lack of trust between faculty. Like, I don't know if your faculty can do what my faculty can do, sort of discussions. And the thing that was beautiful about this president, who was all like, I'm not bending the knee anymore to the 4 years, which is, I feel like I need a bumper sticker for that. They had data about the talent pipeline of where they got their faculty that taught at the community college. And it turns out it's from the university where their students transfer to. And so he brought it to the transfer institution's leadership and was like, do you think that you don't produce good doctoral students? Like, you think that maybe your graduates are not of quality in your graduate programs? They were like, no, of course they are. And then they're like, okay, so what's the problem here? Like, those are your people. Your people are over here doing this work. And they had no idea that they were there. So I say all of this is when we think about who's in our competency-based ecosystem in that space, and we think about who our partners are and the data that we need to make arguments to make the case for some of this work, I think we need to think broadly and differently. And sometimes it's also going and knocking on our doors of our neighbors. And I'm not advocating, an aggressive approach to storming the 4-year temple of learning. But I do think thinking differently about how we can engage with our partners and our relationships with our different stakeholder partners is key to moving forward in our education space at this time.
So I'm going to ask one more question and then turn it over to you. I do think that one of the biggest drivers of change that's accelerated right now is the employer demand piece. And, to the extent that whether or not CBE is having a moment, while it's a painful time for community colleges, I think they're having one too. I mean, in Washington, they're getting a lot more attention. And, for me, I can't keep up with all the announcements from big tech about partnerships with community colleges. Unbelievable. I mean, Microsoft saying they're going to fund the training of 250,000 people via community colleges in cyber. Does this, and you would think again that companies, we always hear that they're interested in skills-based hiring, and that translates to CBE. Is that going to be a driver? Eric, why don't you start on that?
Yeah, and I would also add to that list, just because it's top of mind, as Paul shared in the beginning, Dell and Intel. So Dell and Intel just partnered with the American Association of Community Colleges to do a huge AI push and artificial intelligence incubator for community colleges across the country to be a part of that. So there's this little project, the $20 billion project, that actually is just the start of what could be a $200 billion project in Central Ohio. And when Intel was looking at this, and the reason they chose Ohio was they felt the infrastructure from the community college landscape was ripe enough for them to be able to provide the training needed. So essentially, when they open the doors, they need 3,000 people. 1,500 of those people need to have associate degrees. The average wage in that, it's going to be the largest microchip facility in the world. The average wages for those with associate degrees, not talking about PhDs, associate degrees, is over $120,000 a year. That more than doubles the median income for our county. So that in and of itself tells you that Intel, at least when they looked at it, and good and well that they studied probably just about every state, felt that the community colleges had the resources necessary to be able to do that. On our side, from a competency-based standpoint, IT has always fit incredibly well. We talk about competency-based from the standpoint of you've got to prove that you know what you're doing, right? Because you're not moving forward until you do that. There's no more C's get degrees. You cannot average your way through. You've got to master each of those competencies. Same thing goes in IT, right? You either know how to do it or you don't. And we need to get you to the point, obviously, that you're doing it right every single time. And I think, so for us, this is a moment for the community colleges to step up big, not only within Central Ohio, but within the entire state, but also for our programs as we look at making them more available to the masses and getting them to a place where they don't have to navigate that, as I alluded to earlier, Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule. They come in, they work at the pace they need to work at, and then they master and move forward.
Natasha?
That's awesome, and I think it's a great example of sort of several of the themes of conversations that have been happening throughout this conference, which is there's all this questioning on the value and the worth of education, right? And there's concern about what is a degree signal. Well, in a competency-based education program, like Eric was just talking about, it's very clear. Like, you know exactly what you're getting when you leave, you know what's going into it, you know what people can do, and you know the worth of that in a variety of ways that we don't otherwise. So it answers that sort of proposition statement. But it also shows that when we have these enrollment decline issues within community colleges, that employer partnership is a great way to move to address those enrollment declines. That by thinking about the role of our employers and our employer communities differently and saying, okay, how are we doing this? We're not going and saying, like, do you want to be on an advisory board and, like, look at our curriculum and tell if it's okay? You know, like, we know that no one enjoys those meetings and those conversations anyway, but saying, okay, we're really going to incentivize and get employer skin in the game to create and drive and build in these areas where it's the partnership between the community college and the employer that becomes that economic engine. It's not just the community college driving this in our regions and in our states, but it becomes that relationship between the two. And I think seeing that vote of confidence on the employer side consistently in a variety of states across with the employer partnership community colleges is the way that we're going to address both of these shared needs that we have in our communities.
So as I feared, I didn't leave enough time for you all, but if we'll turn to the virtual attendees for, let's call it a lightning round of very quick questions. Wait, no virtual questions? All right. You all, don't be shy. Here's your moment. Got one right here, please.
Right, we have to get a mic to you because there are virtual friends. And otherwise they cannot hear your question.
So yeah, we'll try to keep your questions quick and we'll try to answer them quickly.
It's not quick, but you can make it as quick as you want. So I'm Maggie, I'm from Indiana University. So we're talking about the partnership, and I'm very interested in the partnership between the employers and the institutions. It's obviously what we have to foster, but I know the faculty aren't ready for those partnerships. And I keep hearing sort of anecdotally, there's the people who really are in the employment industry, and there are the employers who certainly are not. So how do we fix that? I have 6 other questions, but that's the one I'll ask.
That's a good one.
The easiest one, right?
Sure. I'll say so it depends on which faculty, right? So we have within community colleges, you've got career and technical education faculty that most often are from the industry, and we a lot of times get our employer partnerships through our relationships with our industry faculty, which is fantastic in that space. And otherwise, the model of faculty within community colleges is a different one, I think, to think about. And the role that faculty play in some of those choices and governing spaces is also vastly different depending on the institution. So I'm going to make a generalization statement with a lot of pre-qualifiers around that. But most often, I would say, and even in my past work as an assessment person with community colleges, faculty are more interested community college faculty did my student that was here get what they wanted? And I'm very student-centered, very student-driven, and I want to make sure that if you came into my class, that you got the goal that you had out of this class moving forward. I'm not thinking sort of longer pathways at a lot of times, or like, am I setting you up for the next course or these things, but like, did you come, if I get you just for this class, did that work? And I think that relationship and that understanding about your students and your relationship with students opens up that conversation to say, well, what am I doing in this class? And what is my relationship to employer community? So I think I see less of that in community college, but I will let Eric correct me on that point.
No, I would just add on that to say that kind of what I alluded to earlier. We're not at a place where we have a luxury, the luxury anymore to just assume that students are going to come to us. So this is really about a program sustainability issue, right? So if you're engaging with workforce and workforce is telling you you need to do those things, and the faculty member is maybe really not too interested in it, we're at a point now where low enrolled programs are on the chopping block. We know that our budgets have been propped up the last couple of years by CARES funding, but it really is kind of a survival type of mode that we're in. And the way that you do that is to engage with those that are going to hire your students. And if you choose not to, that's kind of, that willful ignorance we're just not at a place where programs are going to have 15 years to show that they have potential. They've got to grow and scale more quickly now. It's just, it sounds kind of blunt, but it's where we are.
Yeah, I would just add to that too, that I think one of the things that universities, let's take a nursing program as an example. You produce nurses, most of those graduates go elsewhere. They leave the area. The graduates that come from my community college stay. I'm going to run into the community. They're going to treat me like these. They become, as they advance through those things, our future teachers in our program. We are creating the group of growing our own and moving in that space in the community colleges differently. So our relationship with it and that space and some of those issues is very different because of that place that centers it, which in some ways our four-year counterparts don't have that same relationship. But
So I feared that we have run out of time. I knew that was going to happen. What? Wait, is that not? Do we have time for one more? No, I thought we had. No, we don't. Sorry.
your question was so epic. We had to end before you asked.
It's a tough topic to cover briefly, so sorry to all of you for that. But please join me in thanking our expert panelists on a great conversation.
Good job.